then he addressed me specifically, saying, "Now Richard, do you know where the HSBC cricket ground is in Beckenham?" To which I replied, "I don't even know where Beckenham is." Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. I was delighted to be contacted recently, and I'm very pleased to be here this afternoon to share something of my cricket umpiring journey with you. I lived for the best part of 10 years in the UK, and for much of that time I stayed in a town called Sevenoaks in Kent. And every Thursday afternoon, a pile of the local newspapers would be left in the foyer of my building. And I picked one up one afternoon to see a story on the back page that explained how a very famous lime tree that had been growing in the outfield of the county cricket ground at Canterbury had blown over and been uprooted in a storm. And tacked onto the end of that article was a single paragraph explaining how a local cricket association was presenting a series of training courses for aspiring umpires over the course of the winter. Now, at this point in time, I had no desire to ever be a cricket umpire. I hadn't played a game for 20 years, but there was a course being presented at the local rugby club, which was about a 10-minute walk away, probably less if I cut across the cricket ground. So I went along. Now, the course itself was presented by a handful of very experienced local cricket umpires. It ran for 10 weeks. We started with 15 students and we finished with 5 before we were all invited to sit an exam. And one of the presenters explained to what was left of the class that the exam for everyone in Kent would be held at the HSBC cricket ground in Beckenham. And then he addressed me specifically, saying, "Now Richard, do you know where the HSBC cricket ground is in Beckenham?" To which I replied, "I don't even know where Beckenham is." Happily, as it turned out, I was able to catch a train from Sevenoaks, walk to the ground and arrive in plenty of time. About 50 or so people sat the exam, and just as I was leaving, I bumped into a fellow who had attended just some of the classes in Sevenoaks, who very kindly offered to give me a lift home. And as we drove along, he insisted on asking me what answers I had provided to various questions. Whereupon it soon became clear, to me anyway, that one of us had almost certainly failed. Now, having no desire to embarrass my driver and risk being left stranded by the side of the road late at night in the middle of winter, I decided that the best course of action was simply to agree with everything that he said, while all the while sitting there thinking to myself, "Will you just shut up and drive?" Happily, I passed the exam. I actually returned 12 months later, did the same training course again, sat a secondary level exam, and then decided, well look, I've come this far, I might as well give this cricket umpiring caper a go. And 2 or 3 months later, I was appointed to my very first match in a pre-season village friendly at a town called Mepham. Now the visiting team this day was called New Ifield. They won the toss, and in just the second over of the match, I found myself standing at square leg when one of the opening batsmen hit a very powerful pull shot, hitting the ball high in the air, way over the boundary. Now, the Mepham Village Green is located alongside what is quite a busy road called the A227. You can probably see where this is going. And as I turned around, watching this ball sail into the distance, I first caught sight of a late model dark green Jaguar that was travelling south along that same road. Now, even my rudimentary grasp of physics indicated that the flight of the ball and the path of the vehicle were likely to coincide. And sure enough, they did, with this almighty thud as this ball landed smack bang in the middle of this car's roof. There was a great screech of brakes as the Jag came to a stop. The drivers jumped out, inspected the damage, and then with a very angry and determined gait, he's marched straight onto the field, making a beeline for me. So here I am, all of 9 deliveries into my cricket umpiring career, watching this furious individual marching towards me, steam pouring from his ears. And as I watched him approach, I was quickly reconciling all of the 42 laws we had studied, together with all the various match day circumstances and scenarios that we'd been presented with. But I couldn't recall anything that came under the heading, irate motorist invades field of play. Now, happily, just as we were about to coincide, as it were, one of the Mepham fielders ran over and was able to explain something of the nuances of the club's insurance policy. And together we were able to suggest that this fellow speak to the club's president, who I dare say up until that point was probably sitting back outside the pavilion enjoying a pint of bitter. Happily, the rest of that match continued without any serious incident. And for the remainder of that first season, I was appointed to any number of matches at some of the most beautiful cricket grounds in towns, villages, schools, and the odd private estate throughout Kent and Sussex. And at the end of that season, I was extended an invitation to join the Kent League umpires panel, which was all very exciting, even if it did mean having to sit an oral exam to qualify. So I've studied like mad for 2 weeks before I turned up at the village hall in a town called Wateringbury, where I sat on a solitary chair in front of a table behind which sat 2 examiners. Now, this wasn't an exam so much as an interrogation. And the tone was set quite early on when I was told, right, now you're walking out onto the field before the start of play, what have you got with you? And I reeled off a list that included a bowler's marker, spare bail, overs card, pen, pair of scissors, sprig spanner, even a couple of band-aids. You've forgotten something, I was told. I thought for a moment. Positive mental attitude? No. Cheerful disposition? No. Beats me, I said. The ball! To which then I fired back, oh, my colleague's got it, pointing to an imaginary associate to my left. Thank you for laughing. I thought it was pretty funny. They didn't. Happily, I did manage to pass all the same, and I spent the next 6 years as a member of the Kent League umpires panel, where I umpired any number of first 11 fixtures and a couple of county matches at Canterbury, where I got to sign my very first, and to date only, autograph for a young lad who was loitering outside the pavilion when he probably should have been at school. I returned to Australia in 2011, where I was able to secure a position on the Cricket Victoria Premier Cricket Umpires panel, from where I soon discovered that club cricket in Victoria is a very different animal. And at the end of the season, I sent an email to the umpiring manager that read something like, look, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to umpire Premier Cricket here in Victoria, but the fact is I haven't enjoyed the experience to anything like the degree that I have or had in England. The exception for me, however, had been a couple of women's matches that I'd stood in that season, and I asked that if it was at all possible, I'd like to stay on as a member of the panel, but umpire women's matches exclusively. Now, I expected a reply, the likes of, listen son, you go where we send you or you don't go anywhere at all. But to my surprise, he agreed. And I spent the next 10 years as a member of the Cricket Victoria Premier Cricket Umpires Panel, the only member, in fact, who umpired women's matches exclusively. Now, I think I was very lucky in that respect because my time coincided with a period of tremendous growth of interest, investment, participation in the women's game. And I got to see any number of young players progress through the underage pathway structure to be playing in the WBBL for Victoria and for Australia. And happily, those same players still found time to turn out for their respective club sides during the season. And I had the unique privilege of umpiring any number of matches that featured several members of the Australian team. One of those matches was a game at Toorak Park between Paran and Box Hill. Paran batted first, made 286 from their allotted 50 overs, which by any measure was an imposing total. And then straight after the tea break, Australian captain Meg Lanning strode to the crease to open the innings for Box Hill. Now, a girl called Nicola Hancock was opening the bowling from my end, and in the very first over of the match, the innings rather, with the entire Box Hill score still on 0, Lanning has played at a ball that's reared from just short of the length and that a split second later was resting in the wicketkeeper's gloves. At which point the bowler, the keeper, every fielder in the vicinity, and I dare say most of the crowd, have launched a huge and boisterous appeal for caught behind. Now, I think it's fair to say that the fate of the game hung in the balance at that point because I couldn't really see any possibility of Box Hill chasing down a score anything like 286 if Meg Lanning was out for a duck. But in any case, the fact is I hadn't seen or heard anything to suggest that she'd actually hit the ball, so I shook my head from side to side, dismissed the appeal, and we got on with the game. Now, the Paran players were pretty unhappy, very disappointed, but to their credit, they soon put the whole episode behind them and we just got on with what would prove to be a very exciting and memorable match. In fact, it was the very last over of the game before Box Hill scored the winning runs, with Meg Lanning still at the crease, having made 177 not out. That was a very lonely 3 hours, I can tell you. It was a friend of mine who suggested that I write a memoir of my cricket umpiring career. And the results of that endeavour is a book called Stumped, One Cricket Umpire, Two Countries. Stumped is available as a paperback, as an ebook and an audio book on Amazon, other online retailers and from bookshops. In fact, I actually narrated and recorded the audiobook version of Stumped myself, setting up a rather makeshift recording studio in my home. I had blankets draped over computers and doonas hanging from bookshelves and draped over laundry racks and windows and the like, all as a means of soundproofing. It was all rather crude, but nonetheless effective, although much of the credit has to go to an audio engineer that I managed to find on the internet. His name is James Miller, and he was able to take all of my original recordings and remove all the sort of ambient and background noise before presenting me with a very clean and crisp version of what I had originally created. And when James first sent me those files, I was thrilled. But we'd never actually even spoken, so I started to draft him an email, and as I did, I looked at his website where I saw his profile photo, and I dare say that at this stage at least, I reckon he was about 26. And as I drafted this email, I said, James, thank you so much for doing such a wonderful job with these files. I sound like Leonard Teal. And I dare say that within seconds of reading that email, he has logged onto Google and typed the words Leonard Teal into the search bar. I hope everyone here today will continue to support the Australian women's cricket team well into the future. I can assure you every member of that team, to say nothing of those playing in the WBBL and for Victoria or any other state, is a very dedicated athlete, a tremendous cricketer and an outstanding ambassador, both for the game and for the country. In England, there is an inherent respect for cricket's history and traditions. It's not something people need to be asked to adhere to. For the most part, it's something that just simply exists. Sadly, that's not the case in this country. In Australia, for a lot of people in Australia, all that matters when it comes to cricket is winning. The exception to that, of course, is the women's game, because female cricketers the world over continue to demonstrate that it is possible to be committed, focused, driven and competitive without resorting to the sort of behaviour and tactics that some of their male colleagues will justify by saying, that's just how the game is played. Happily, there are no end of opportunities for young, talented, committed girls who want to play cricket in this day and age. There's a tremendous coaching structure, certainly in Victoria, I dare say throughout Australia, and some tremendous opportunities for those who are talented and committed enough to want to play the game at a professional level. Our female cricketers deserve greater recognition in the media and by the public at large. And everyone here today, this afternoon, can help in that endeavour by simply getting to know the names of all of the players in the Australian women's cricket team. That's your homework for this week. I'll come back in 6 months and see how you're getting on. Thanks again. Thank you.
Learn more in Stumped. One Cricket Umpire, Two Countries by Richard Harrison. You get the book at Amazon.